All right, in the second video here, we're going to look at rendering multiple angle views of the sculpture. So we have to do a little bit of a setup to make sure this part works accurately. So again, it is important that you do the inspection first and make sure your model and everything is placed in its right location. For this step, we're going to work with the 3D camera a little bit more in our scene to be able to get it to lock onto an area in our scene so that we can spin the camera around to get the different angle previews that we need of our model. So let's start off by looking at that, and I'll show you again each step. It's pretty fast and easy to make it happen once you have it set up accurately. So here's where we'll start. Again, we're going to make a front side, a left side, and a right. And I think we make a fourth angle view, angle of the work that's supposed to be a close-up or detail of your choosing of the model. So we're going to have the quad view turned on. And this way we can see our model from different viewports. I'm going to switch out of the render preview because that, again, sucks up a lot of RAM on screen for as you make changes. So I'm just going to go to solid shading for now. And again, when you're doing this step, always make sure your model and your lights are properly positioned in your scene. And again, everything is located over the top of the ground grid plane inside of your scene. If it's not, then you're not going to be in good shape for finishing out export and doing the rest of this. So what we're going to do is find our camera inside of our scene. So again, to locate your camera, you can select it from the outliner panel in the upper right and start there, and that'll highlight it with a widget, and then just kind of zoom out on your other respective views to locate that widget wherever it appears. And that represents the location of our camera currently. And now that we have that turned on, I'm going to go ahead and activate my camera preview window. So to do camera preview, you can either hit the number 0 on your number pad on the far right of your extended keyboard. Do not use the number 0 on your upper number strip that goes above your basic alphanumeric keys. That'll switch layers in Blender, and it makes your whole scene magically disappear. If you have that happen, just hit the number 1 and it'll bring everything back to the right layer. So just be aware if you accidentally do that, but use the number 0 on the far side instead, and that'll turn on your preview window for your camera perspective. You can also use the view menu option down below on your 3D menu, and then just click on the one that says camera from the list, and that will go straight to your camera viewport. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to link the camera to an invisible object inside of our scene. So we'll add an invisible object to our scene for the camera to link onto. So to do that, we're going to go to Add from the menu down below. So make sure you're in object mode for this, by the way. You can't be in edit or sculpt mode to access this. But go down to Add and go up to where it says empty, and then we're going to add an empty cube to our scene. Modelers and animators often use empty objects to control other elements in the scene invisibly, like to control like a puppet, like with strings. They will use invisible items in the scene to better or more easily mimic movements with. So we'll do that with this particular object. So my empty object appeared on scene. Make sure you see where it dropped it inside of Blender. Chances are it's dropped it wherever this little red dotted circle is in your scene currently. So once you find that, move your cube into scene. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of center it over our character, or over around the center of your sculptural area. So you have to coordinate this with each of your viewports. I might recommend temporarily turning off the cyclorama to do this so you can see your right side view. So I'm just going to turn off my cyclorama by hitting the eyeball for it in the outliner. And again, we want to get that cube positioned to where it's approximately at the center of your object. You can blow up the size of the cube if you need to help you. So if you want to hit S in one of your windows and then just drag out the scale of it so you can see it, that's fine. That way you can just visualize it more clearly. But the center of the widget, we want positioned about at the center of our entire sculptural area. So make sure that it's centered over your object in the top view, and that it's kind of sitting around the middle or the upper third of your object in the front or side view. And again, this object we're going to use to lock the camera onto in our scene so that it always looks at it no matter where we move the camera inside of our scene. All right. Now, once we've got the cube positioned in place, we're going to go back to our camera in our outliner panel. So I'm going to reselect my camera over in the upper right. And we're going to go to the Properties panel down below the outliner. And so down in Properties, we're going to make a couple adjustments. First off, go to your camera property icon. That's the camera property that looks like a little dual spool cinematic camera icon. And go to that. And we need to make sure that our camera is set to orthographic instead of perspective. So make sure to click on the blue button that says orthographic under your camera properties. And after we do that, we're not going to change much more on the camera at the moment. We'll leave it alone. But while we're in properties, there's another icon that I want you to click on that looks like a chain link. It's right next to the camera icon. This is called Constraints. So I want you to click on Constraints. And this is kind of like adding a modifier in a way to an item in your scene. But we're going to use the constraint. And once you pull up constraints, we'll go to the black button, Add Object Constraint. And then we're going to use the option from the tracking category called Track To. All right. Now when you select Track To, you get some properties pulled up for it down in the property menu. And we're going to basically tell the camera to always look at the empty cube on screen. So to do that, we first have to set the target, which is whatever shape in your scene you want it to look at. So click on the little orange cube for where it says target, and select from the list your empty object. It should say empty from the list. Okay, now that's a start. We haven't finished doing this. So your camera's probably pointed in a goofy direction currently, and that's okay. But we're going to tell it to look at the proper direction for the axis of the object. So once we've done that, we're going to change the 2, where it says 2, make sure that it's set to -Z. And your up should be set to Y. And then you want to make sure that the box for target Z is checked. All right. And if you move your mouse out to your top view, go to your top view window and click and drag on inside the little white circle for your camera widget. And click and drag, and you should be able to pan your camera around your scene, and it will continuously lock onto your empty object, wherever it may be located currently. And so this is kind of the first stage of getting your camera positioned correctly so that you can get out those still image exports. This makes the process easier rather than trying to manually move the camera around to get the right angle, because you have to constantly re-rotate it and rechange it. This just takes kind of a lot of that stuff out of the process. So now that we got the camera locked on, again, you should make sure that your camera, when you rotate it in the top view, or just click and drag the camera around in the top view, that it stays locked on to and always aims at that object. So as I drag around, my camera perspective view should always change accordingly. Much easier to work with the camera this way. Excuse me. Okay, so the last thing we need to do, let's go ahead and aim the camera at the front of the model. So I'm going to turn my cyclorama back on now. And I'm going to swing my camera around to where it aims at the front of my model. So when I'm looking in my camera viewport, it shows the front of it. And I'm going to go down to my front view window, and I'm just going to change the height of my camera. It doesn't need to be looking at your model from down below. Okay, you want to kind of look at it from sort of a straight-on perspective, approximately. So I'm just kind of moving my camera up and down to where it's kind of centered over the empty box or the empty cube that I added to my scene. Once I've done that, and again, I can see my model, I'm going to go back to my camera properties in the property panel. And we're going to change the option that says orthographic scale so that we can zoom out to make sure that we can see our entire model. Now, you do not need to see all of the cyclorama. We're just trying to get the model centered in view at this time. Okay? It doesn't hurt to have your camera raised up a little to see more of the base of the cyclorama when you zoom out on your screen. That way we can actually get the entire model in screen and a little bit of its floor down beneath it. If you need to change the relative height of your empty object to adjust camera angle, that's fine. I'm going to actually drag my camera, or not my camera, my empty object down a little in my front view so that my camera sees or centers my model vertically inside the scene. So I'm just kind of dragging it and see how the camera just moves as I move the empty. So that's kind of helpful. All right. So you get that position to where your character looks like it's roughly centered inside the, again, inside of the scene for your camera. And in your camera properties, again, just play around with the orthographic scale until you get it positioned about where you want it. All right. So now that we got that stuff set up, now what we're going to do is we're going to make adjustments to be able to render out the proper still images from Blender. So anytime that you want to render out still images of a finished 3D graphic in here, again, the camera has to be aimed at the subject that you're wanting to work with. So we're going to change some settings that help us output a good image. So to do that, we'll go back to Properties menu. And this time I want you to select the first icon in the Properties list that looks like just a basic SLR kind of still camera. These are your render properties underneath this little camera icon. And here are some of the settings that we need to change. First off, where it says Display, this first little option for display, and it gives you a black button that might say Image Editor, switch that to New Window. If you don't do this, every time you hit render, it's going to overtake your main 3D menu scene and convert it into a render screen, and that can get really confusing. So please make sure to change this option for display under render to New Window. In the Dimensions section, we're going to do a couple adjustments to the resolution. So the end result is that our final images are all going to fit on an 8x10 printout, and it'll be in a perfect quad. So we're going to make each of our images approximately an 8.5 by 11. image. So for X, for your resolution in this dimension section, click on that and type over the X resolution to be 850. And then for your Y resolution, make it 1100. And the importance of this is this sets the orientation of your camera. Now, notice when I did it, this is actually backwards for a portrait resolution camera angle. So in my camera viewport, right now it shows a vertical oriented rectangle. That's good if your scene is actually a vertically oriented model design. So if you've got a design that's more vertically designed, then please use a vertical angled image. If not, then change the resolution and flip the numbers from X could then be 1100 instead, and then Y could be 850. And when you do that, then it switches it back to a horizontal area. And always review what it gives you. Make sure that, again, your model still fits snugly inside of the camera viewport. If the camera's too big now, go back to your orthographic scale property under the camera property and zoom back in. I had to zoom in on mine because I pulled too far away after I changed the shape of the image. But back in the render property, that still image icon, again, resolution sets the output size for the image. So you want to use that correctly for whatever your need may be. Below that for resolution, it gives you a percentage slider, which is probably set to 50. Drag that all the way up to 100, because that represents the output quality of your image. All right, now that's all we're going to change inside of dimensions. We're going to slide down a bit and go to the section that's called output. So go down to the output attributes. And underneath output, there are a couple things we're going to change in here. Number one, we need to change the type of file it's going to output when we create the still image. So right now, by default, it's set to PNG, which is not a high quality format file. So I'm going to click on where it says PNG, and I'm going to select a format that's more appropriate for bringing into Photoshop and using. So we'll use JPEG from the listing. So I'll click on JPEG. And after that, I'm going to select the color mode option for RGB. So it'll say BW or RGB across from JPEG. Make sure that's set to RGB. And then the quality slider below that should also be set to 100%. So you can click and drag on that slider for quality and just drag it all the way over to 100. That way, when you get your image out, it actually comes out at a decent JPEG quality instead of really compressed and deteriorated. Excuse me. All right, now let's slide back up to the top of our render property. So just kind of scroll back up on this little property window. And now what we're going to do is hit this button at the top that says render, that shows the little camera icon connected to it. And when I click that, a new window pops up on screen. And what it gives me is a complete rendered preview of that camera angle on my scene currently. Now, when you do this, it doesn't automatically save the JPEG to file. This just shows you what it rendered. You have to actually go to save it. But if you like what it's showing you, right, like the angle is correct on the model, everything looks great, what you can do is go down to where it says image on this lower menu that it gives you. So where it says image down there, click on image. And you're going to go to Save as Image. And then it brings up your directory dialog in Blender. And you just want to save it to wherever your work is going to be. So I'm going to go save it to my project folder. And I'm going to put it in the output folder for now. And I'm going to retitle it. This is important. Whenever you're saving different image views of your work, make sure that you give them a name so you know which view is which when you're reorganizing. So this is my front view. That's what I'm going to call it. And over here on the left, the lower left of this save screen, you have some settings that say save as image. Just make sure that it still says JPEG, quality 100%, and RGB is checked. That way, those settings stay intact when it makes the final image. All right, now we can go up and hit Save as Image. And we should have stored in our project folder that first saved image. So if I go into my output, there's my JPEG file. Got it. All right. Now when you're done with that, you can close this extra render window that it popped up. Close that out to go back to your regular scene. And once you've rendered your first one, you just go through the same steps for saving and rendering, or rendering and saving at this point, because we already have all the rest of the settings correct now. So all we have to do now to make our other image previews or renders is to move our camera. So I'm going to just drag my camera now over to a side view of my work. And again, if I need to adjust positioning of my invisible object to get a better angle, or to adjust my camera to get a better angle on my object, I will do that at this stage. Also, if I need to change orthographic scale, I can do that at this time as well. But I want to make sure that I get appropriate views of my model from each side. And they don't have to be perfectly all the way from the right or all the way from the left, but they should be close, is what I'll emphasize on that particular part. So again, we get it repositioned, go back to our render property, hit render again, and we'll get our secondary angle out of our piece. And then we'll just go to image again and save as image. And we'll also rename this file to be the maybe the right side. Make sure RGB is checked. Close that window. Go back to my camera. Slide it around to the other side of the model. And do the same thing again. Render that that side of the model as well. Image, save as image, and then we'll call this one left. And then usually, like another good standard angle, again, this is up to you. You can have a close-up if there's a specific collection of details that are important to you for viewing of the model that you've worked on that say something about the work. You can change the zoom of your camera property to zoom in on a specific detail area, and then move around like either your camera or your invisible box to get an accurate view on those specific said details. And then you'll render out an image for that as well. And save that to file. And that one you can just call detail shot or detail image, whatever you want to call it that makes sense of that. All right. And now you have all of your views, and that's how you make them. Again, once you set it up initially, then it's a little less painful to go through and make all of the other following renders of your scene. But again, you want to make sure that you have that camera set up correctly to do this part accurately. Now that's all we're going to do for this particular video demonstration. The next one we're going to show is how to take all those pieces and construct them together accurately and label them inside of Photoshop to make a final quad view image.